Dr. Ofosu is an industrial slash organizational psychologist with over 20 years of experience working with individuals and organizations in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. She is the president and principal consultant of I/O Advisory Services, Inc., which she founded in 2012. Through her practice, she provides career counseling, executive coaching, and supports organizations in areas such as recruitment, leadership assessments, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, DEI, as well as workplace bullying and harassment. Currently, her research at Economic and Social Development Canada, for short ESDC, examines the relationship between workplace inclusion, employee identities, both visible and invisible, psychological safety, leadership styles, and organizational culture. Doctor, wow, this is a lot of things that you are involved in. There's a lot to break down and decipher. Hopefully, we can cover it all in the podcast.
All right.
It's good to have you. So
I'm happy to be
maybe you
here.
can, yeah. Something that while we were doing our research, we noticed is a term called Black psychology. So maybe we can start from there and then go into depth from that.
Also, we're very, we're learning, we're open-minded. We're asking you these questions because we want to learn and get better. Sounds good.
Absolutely. Well, Black psychology is an area that I discovered when I was in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had to take a mandatory course on the history of psychology, and I'm not great in history. So for my class project, I chose to talk about the civil rights movement in the United
Okay.
States because I figured at least that would probably make it feel interesting and help me learn what psychology was doing during this very pivotal time in North America. So that's where I first discovered Black psychology. And it's
Mm-hmm.
basically looking at psychology, but always through a lens of liberation rather than oppression, and figuring out how things could resonate and be most relevant to support members of the Black communities that have had a very hard time in North America.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my initial starting point. But then after I graduated, I went and was just living my life, working, having, making a living, raising a family, and
Mm-hmm.
hadn't really thought much about Black psychology. But those seeds were definitely planted. So even without doing a whole lot of intentional work, I would always think, well, how would this apply to somebody who is not white, not of European descent,
Mm-hmm.
not Christian, and sort of making some of those small adjustments. But then a couple of years ago, somebody who I initially met over 20 years ago came to me and said, I'm tired of going to psychology conferences in Canada and only being one of maybe two or three Black people out of thousands. So it was her idea to create this section focused on Black psychology. And so that's a section within the Canadian Psychological Association. And really, we just exist to support students of psychology, aspiring students of psychology, and folks who are working with a psychology background. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my take on it.
Thank you for your
Awesome.
work. Before
You're welcome.
you were
Yeah.
there, people might have not thought of the idea of Black psychology or that it existed or that people of different backgrounds have different psychologies or different perspectives on the world. And so, yeah, thank you for doing that work to support people of African descent in Canada.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ali said the right words before I could say them. um,
Well, I got to say, one thing that's been a beautiful outcome of all of this,
Mm-hmm.
that it has reminded everybody that these same issues exist for other communities that have been kind of overlooked within
mhm.
psychology. So, of course, we have intersecting identities. So, we have many
Yeah.
Black people who are Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We have Asian people who are recognizing the same issues, and now they've created a section.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been an interesting way to basically include a lot of people even
Yeah.
though our initial intention was to focus on underrepresentation and
Hmm.
just certain things not being recognized in terms of looking at psychological concepts and practices without paying attention to the social constructs.
Yeah, it's interesting how something that clicked in my head was this. It's like this thought of how um, people from the African descent in North America pushing for their civil liberties and their rights has kind of opened the way for other minorities to also, kind of shed the light on them as well. So
Hmm.
it's like people of African descent paved the way for them to kind of um, find their own route to representation, for getting their own rights as well, and so on. And it's also like when you were saying like different categories within people of African descent, for example, Muslims, and there's obviously other categories. These are all like sub factors that are also major, because within each one you can find a lot of like a web of intricate details that also play into how their psychology works, and you know just the mental state they can be in.
Hmm.
So, but something that would probably make it a bit clearer going forward in this podcast is if we can understand maybe three major struggles within the Black people face in Canada that is common amongst all Black people. Maybe we can start from there to like kind of set the agenda going forward.
Sure, what a great question. Well, I think one thing that's I'm going to borrow a little bit from Dr. Tama Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
She's a very established American Black psychologist, previous president of the American Psychological Association. And she said, Black people cannot out excellence racism. And that's
Okay,
an interesting
that's
reminder for me because I work with so many professionals who are so capable and they still deal with all kinds of oppression, even if it's kind of quiet, low key. So I think that that piece about never being able to outperform, out excellence racism is an interesting one.
hmm
Another one is, and I would say that this is especially for Black men, but to some extent also for Black women. All of
yeah,
these stereotypes around um, being aggressive, being criminal, being just problematic and bad. That's another one
yeah,
that's terrible. And of course, people who know Black people know they're just like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And had it not been for white supremacy, well, skin color probably would be just as important as height or eye color. It'd be inconsequential.
mm,
Third one, which is probably not talked about as much, but the impact of living in a world where even before you open your mouth, even before somebody knows anything about you, they may jump to a bunch of conclusions just because of your skin color. And so
yeah,
this is something that even little kids are experiencing. And of course, it continues all throughout life. And for me, I've come to an interesting conclusion. And of course, I recognize I have lots and lots of privileges. But I also recognize that because I've had my own company since 2012, for the most part, the people who I interact with want to interact with me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay,
generally speaking, I'm treated pretty well in a lot of environments. And that is a very different reality from so many people who work in workplaces where they contribute a lot, but somehow people don't necessarily like them. So it
mm,
reminds me of a rap song about how sometimes people like what you make, but they don't like you.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's that's a good analogy, to be honest.
yeah.
It Yeah. um, it it makes me think when you talk about that, like working in a workplace where people don't necessarily want you. Does that mean like you should fight for staying there, or maybe you're just not with the right group, kind of thing? Because like it's the same thing with friends, for example.
Mhm.
If it's not working out with friends, you got to make new ones, got to change them.
I agree with that sentiment. Like if you're always the one initiating contact with some certain people and they never
Mm-hmm.
reciprocate,
Mm,
eventually if you stop trying, then the friendship dies.
Mm.
yeah.
The thing that's more complicated is that when it's about your livelihood, well, it may take you a minute to find the next comparable or better opportunity.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you're working in a place where they appreciate what you're contributing, but they're not necessarily, they don't wrap their arms around you. They're not really welcoming you or even respecting you in the ways that they may respect and appreciate other people's efforts. So if you're in that situation, well, even if you try to leave, it's not always clear that you're going to get the right kind of job recommendation or reference from your previous employer when you're trying to leave. So it's a little complicated, but I do believe that fundamentally, if you're in a place where you don't feel welcome, your contributions don't feel genuinely appreciated, well, I think it's a signal that it's a good idea to find some place where there is a better fit. Because I think the toll on your heart and your mind, it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
This
No,
is
that is true.
a an issue with representation for all kinds of minorities, from the top to the bottom, right? And we've done our research and found that 8 out of 500 Fortune 500 CEOs are of African descent. So that's 8 out of 500. So from the top, it's also really hard to break through. I can't imagine what it's like for all people of African descent.
And to be fair, I think the same analysis probably applies in some respects to other groups,
Of course.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
religious minorities, members of the 2S LGBTQ community, people with visible or invisible disabilities, Indigenous people in Canada. It's, I think that for us, like for Black people, it's a different version because we're so visible, but it's the same analysis with the other groups.
Hmm.
The way I
So
see it is
yeah.
that we all have different backgrounds, have our own perspectives and knowledge. Me and Said are Lebanese, and so we have our own point of view on the world and the way we would approach business and creativity and art. And so the way I see it, if these Fortune 500 companies want to succeed more and reach more audiences and innovate, you need to invest in diversity in your agencies, because if you only have a certain background of people in your agency, you're only going to come up with so many limited ideas.
Absolutely. And I think about how um, we have somebody named Maslow in psychology, and he talks
Mm-hmm.
about this hierarchy of human needs, and belonging is built into that. So I think anyone who's fair-minded will recognize, well, belonging shouldn't just apply to some people, right? It shouldn't even be a fight. Everybody should be allowed to belong. And to make it kind of concrete in terms of what's happening in workplaces, in terms of productivity, innovation. Well, imagine if, 60% of your workplace, when you add up all the different identities, feels that they need to protect themselves from mistreatment at work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that means that 60% of your employees are absolutely preoccupied with survival and self protection. So, some percentage of their mental and emotional energy is going into self protection instead of just doing their work. So, from my perspective, it's a beautiful thing when you get this alignment between what's practical and what's morally appropriate. Here,
Hmm.
both imperatives, both the practical and the
Mm-hmm.
moral imperative, say, "Hey, treat everybody decently." Full stop.
That's true. And I guess for some people, they might not understand what it means, like to treat everyone fairly because of maybe their upbringing and the environment that they were surrounded with growing up. Um, so what factors into the transition of an individual who has possibly been the first 20 years of their life in an environment where it's just hostile against another race and not necessarily one that is considerate of other people or other individuals?
Well, I think there's two categories of people. I'm sure you
Okay.
guys are familiar with the 80-20 rule,
Mm-hmm.
where 20% of the people cause 80% of the problems, or
Yeah.
or 20%. But there's an 80-20 rule that
Mm-hmm.
seems to happen in lots of different contexts, not just human behavior, but business, all kinds of things.
Yeah, that's true.
So, there may be some people who it doesn't matter what you do, they will only see humanity and people who are just like them. So we can't worry about them. And maybe we should focus on the 80% of the people who, when they realize, excuse me, oh, wait a second, how did we get here? And how can we fix this?
Hmm.
There's something to work with. Because most fair minded people don't want to be cruel to people who haven't done anything to them. That's just weird.
Yeah, that is true.
And, in North America in particular, we've been
Mm-hmm.
through a lot during the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, from all the different outcomes in terms of health disparities, where racialized people who had lower income, lower socioeconomic status were hit even harder by the pandemic. We've been through that, and we've been through the racial reckoning that happened after the murder of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
And in Canada, we've been through quite a lot of new awareness around what's happened to Indigenous people. So it's hard to imagine that with all of these things that have happened over the past 5 years, that some people have never heard of it. I mean, it's been kind of all consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it feels a bit shocking when people say they don't know what to do and they don't know that there's anything wrong.
Yeah.
But sometimes I say to myself, well, we all know how we treat our favorite people, and we all know how we treat people who we appreciate and respect. So when we're not doing that, there's our clue that we need to make some adjustments.
Totally. I think
Mm.
a lot of
Yeah.
people they just don't want to see it, that it's right in front of them, Everything's glaringly in front of them, all these issues. And people have issues of their own too. And then, so when we're talking about employment, for example, we're all competing for the same jobs. And so we want to treat people fairly. But then I think people don't realize that people with different environments and backgrounds don't have the same opportunities that everyone else has. Is that fair to say? Like, how does your environment affect your job opportunities?
Well, I would agree that some people will never get certain opportunities just because of all kinds of structural discrimination, structural racism. But I would also argue that regardless of our backgrounds, a lot of people are just very high performers. So,
Mm-hmm.
given a chance, they will knock it out of the park.
Mm-hmm.
And often it's those same people who would be traditionally underrepresented. Well, those are the people who work the hardest because they don't even get a chance. They don't even get a foot in the door unless they are literally walking on water, rock stars who are capable.
Totally.
So
I
you
mean,
said,
speaking from
so you're,
me and Said's background, we're Lebanese, and so he's moved to the London, I've moved to the Los Angeles, and we're really working hard, and for me, my perspective is that I'm lucky and privileged to be able to have a beautiful job, to have this podcast, to have all the opportunities that I have, and so I'm seizing the moment. And then more compared to a lot of my American friends who just take these things for granted.
Well, you probably learned the hard way that with a name like Ali or Saeed, well, you better be really good, or else no one's going to call you back for that interview.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure things are especially complicated right now because of all the geopolitics.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Um, so what advice would you give people, like, for example, who are in a similar situation as us, who are, let's say they have the potential to be hardworking, like you were saying, they can be high achievers, but maybe it's just not, they're not doing it. Like, what do you think would be the factors that are affecting them or stopping them from being high achievers themselves?
I think it's probably two parts. So part of it is societal stereotypes and biases and whatnot.
Hmm.
And so with that, it means you're probably going to have to look harder to find opportunities that are fair and organizations that are welcoming, or at least neutral, decent,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's
Yeah.
that piece. But then there's this other piece where, you know, we're all human. And if you keep applying for positions or trying to make progress and doors keep getting slammed in your face, well, it's very discouraging.
Yeah.
So I think, it can be tough to find ways to sustain your feelings of self worth, your feelings of self confidence, despite mistreatment.
Hmm.
So, in these situations, I think it's important for us to stay close to our communities, stay close to people who can affirm us, can support us, because alone, with all of that stuff happening, it's just too hard.
Yeah, that's true.
So that and sort of leaning into our cultures that again are very affirming and remind us who we are, remind us of our value. It's good. It's not really enough, but it's a good start.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that point. I remember because when I came here to the UK, like, I moved completely by myself. I didn't have anyone. Just, I left basically my whole life back in Lebanon. So when it came to the point when I had to start applying for jobs after I graduated, the amount of rejections that, like, you'd face, definitely eventually just, it would skew your perspective about your self worth, and like even your self esteem could seriously drop from that, because you'd have this, let's say you'd have this certain plan or expectation set when you first come and you start this project that you had, prepared, and you really want to get something done, but then all of these rejections, and you don't have a support system to kind of keep you going, keep pushing you
Hmm.
forward. um, Eventually the amount of rejections just can really slow you down.
Oh, of course. So I'm glad you guys have this podcast because I mean it seems terrific. So it's a
Thank you.
reminder that you are capable and you're having an impact regardless of what may be happening in other aspects of your lives.
Yeah, I mean, even if we are not directly impacting, like, other people, we'd feel the impact on ourselves first, and I
Hmm.
feel like that's a good way to start,
Oh
definitely.
yeah, because when we don't feel capable, it's hard to be capable,
Yeah,
and that's part
that's
of the
true.
insidiousness of of all this discrimination and white supremacy and anti everything.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Because it hurts our own identities. And if we're not careful, we start to
Yeah.
believe. what other people think about us, even though that's not even accurate.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, Dr. Helen, I kind of want to like segue into the topic of entrepreneurship, if that's all right,
Of course.
since we're kind of talking about obstacles that people face. What do you think are like issues that, for example, like what are issues that Black people face when, let's say, they're starting a business and like from the get go? What are some like major issues that they face?
I think the big one is access to capital.
Hmm.
Okay.
So in North America, for sure, things have been slanted where some people kind of had a 400-year head start in terms of building wealth.
Mm.
So we have a
All right.
big wealth gap, which makes it harder to have capital to start a business.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, when I started, I was able to bootstrap mostly because I had been, I'll be honest, I had some good fortune in terms of who my family was, and having had a job for quite some time, I had assets, I had access to credit. So I didn't
Yeah.
take out a business loan because I heard that was a waste of time. But I had a line of credit and I had some savings. So I was able to get things going. But 12 years ago when I started, well, it was not cool to be a Black woman in business. So it was a hard start. It took a while to build enough ongoing revenue to keep things sustainable. So I'm
Mm.
sure my experiences are just amplified by other people who maybe didn't have as much access to credit, didn't have assets, maybe didn't have as much education. So I was good at what I was doing, but it was still hard to get started. And I didn't
Yeah.
come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I was kind of learning a lot of things about business development kind of
Mm-hmm.
as I
Yeah.
was going. So I would think those are still challenges for folks. The capital, the discrimination, and just a lack of knowledge about the nuts and bolts of business.
Hmm.
Is there also like maybe systematic racism when it comes to entrepreneurship, like within the business? Uh, like if you want to get a loan or if you're going to get a line of credit, um, do Black people face some sort of racism there when they're starting the business as well?
I believe so. I did not actively apply for loans, so I didn't experience it personally, but
Mm-hmm.
I had heard enough about it that I just didn't even bother.
Hmm.
And I know
Okay.
that there's a Black Canadian Chamber of Commerce that has financial programs in place that are connected to banks that help people get over some of these initial hurdles in terms of access to credit in the beginning,
Yeah.
and just learning more about some of the mechanics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Ali,
Yeah,
what are your
that's
thoughts
a.
on this?
It sounds like a lot of challenges just at the get go, for all of us, minorities, in our communities. Just things are built uh, to preserve maybe status quo and not allow us to flourish in the best of ways. And I'm hopeful that by being entrepreneurs, by you building your own business, by us building our own business, that we're able to prove ourselves to the world that we are capable of being business leaders and getting that trust. And hopefully in the future things will change and we'll be the people that opens it up for the generation after us. um, that's the way I see it. I work in Los Angeles, I work in film in Hollywood, and I think a lot about like the effects of media and film representations. Me and Said were from Lebanon, so when for us our idea of African Americans from what we saw in movies and TV, and so when I came to America, and I realized, oh no, African American people have so many different backgrounds. It's not just whatever stereotype you see on the TV. It made me think about all the years of watching movies and how incorrect a lot of it is, and how inaccurate is depiction and how it affects the whole world's perspective on people of African descent in the West. And I can't wait for
Yeah, it's
us
crazy.
Arabs to get representation one day too.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
glad you're
just to
doing what you're doing. It helps.
Mm-hmm.
just to add to what Ali was saying is like I think maybe between me and him, we've in Lebanon we've met maybe, or we personally know like 3 or 4 black people in the whole country, and
Um,
like that shows you how much like in that region there isn't much like we don't get in touch much with that with many races
mhm.
because it's not as diverse. So it can be a bit of a culture shock, I would say, when you come to the West and you see all of this like this diversity and how everyone's just like living together, and there's so many cultures that you have to learn and understand at the same time.
And I must admit, I'm very lucky because I know several Saids, many Alis, some from Lebanon, some from the Emirates,
Mm-hmm.
some from Saudi. So it's nice. I've been blessed by that kind of diversity just while in school and out living my life.
Yeah, it is a privilege to be surrounded by a diverse environment, in my opinion, because that alone is an education as well, which can really open a lot of like uh, let's say neurological doors in your head,
Yeah.
neurological pathways, because it allows you to be more open-minded, and especially if you take the time to talk to these people and understand their way of thinking, their cultures, their backgrounds. This really makes a difference in how you approach the world, and can take can definitely teach your person, like it can, I would say, update your personality to be in my opinion, a better one. You can become a better person by just hanging out with different cultures.
Well, that's it. And these are old cultures, often older cultures than what we have in North America. So they must know something.
Yeah, definitely.
And I like the fact that we have so many examples of racialized communities that have come to like could move to other countries and been tremendously successful entrepreneurs.
hmm Yeah,
Right? Well, almost every city has a Chinatown,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
and they're very they're successful.
Mm-hmm.
I look at and admire the transformation that Jewish communities have had in a
Yeah,
short
yeah.
period, right? Like going from the Holocaust when so much had been stolen and basically starting from scratch in many different countries after they've moved. And now
hmm
these are communities that are established and influential. So, if we look at some of these examples, we know it's possible. Sure, those may be different versions of discrimination than Islamophobia or anti Black racism, but there are some parallels and they encourage me.
hmm Um, Speaking about food now and cultures, what, in your opinion, which culture makes the best food? Let's go with
Oh
that.
boy.
Let's go with this question.
That's a
My
tough one.
family, those are fighting words, right? My mother's from Jamaica, my father's from Ghana. So
Oh wow.
what's the best? Is it oxtail?
Oh,
Is it jollof rice? Is it like what is it? Oh,
it's a tough choice. It's a tough.
it is.
So, which one would you say is more something that you would have consistently if you had to choose?
Oh, just one?
Just one.
Oh
That's
my
it.
goodness. I don't
Tough
even know.
choices have to be made, doctor.
I guess for me, I would probably choose curry chicken.
Oh, okay.
That's a big mix. You went Indian a little
Ghana and
bit.
Jamaica
Yeah.
Well, it's
completely out.
definitely a little bit on the Caribbean side, but let's face it, every culture probably has a version, right?
Totally.
I love
Yeah,
I
that's
love
true.
Thai
That's true.
curry chicken. I love Jamaican curry chicken, Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, okay. Fair. So there is a choice there.
Yeah.
Um,
Something
I kind of
unrelated
yeah,
to
go for it.
health side. Yeah, we were gonna talk about health a bit. Something we've read
Just going
about
into
is
that,
that
yeah.
people, minorities were disproportionately affected during COVID, um, and that there's still a lot of health issues going on amongst people, minorities in different communities. In my opinion, I just wish people would get. I wish people that with the power to have the to make the change understand that if we're all healthy, if we all have equal opportunity backgrounds, if we're all able to have the same job opportunities, then we will make the whole nation more rich, more prosperous, more efficient, more productive, with many more beautiful products and art and culture, And so that's another thing I've come to realize is a disadvantage to minorities.
Well, I came across some research maybe 18 months ago, and it was produced by Dr. Arlene Geronimus. And she's been doing this research for 20 something years. And she has basically, she argues that when you're a member of an oppressed group, whether it's racial oppression, religious, gender, sexual orientation, whatever, but when you're in an oppressed group and you're forever either protecting yourself or kind of making all kinds of adaptations to survive in a climate that's, unwelcoming or hostile, then your body is forever, um,
Stressed.
basically yeah, exactly, stressed, chronically
Mm,
stressed.
fair.
And it has an impact on your neuroendocrine system, your metabolic system, cardiovascular system, metabolic system. And apparently, all of these things are why we had these racial disparities during COVID, because people who are dealing with all of those types of oppression that I mentioned, plus financial
Mm-hmm.
oppression or poverty, those folks were the ones who were the most taxed during COVID. And that's why you had those health disparities. So, and apparently, that's also why there's higher levels of things like high blood pressure, diabetes, certain types of cancers that are all probably linked to this chronic stress and chronic oppression. So that's another reason why I believe that when people are in bad workplaces that make them feel just stressed out and and unwelcome and excluded, well, all of that, it has a toll. So the extent that we can make some changes to lessen those negative forces, it should make us less, make the demands on us less, so we don't have to do so much adjusting and accommodating.
So, what are the symptoms of like working in a bad workplace? If you're going through that, you're constantly experiencing these terrible moments during work, people being racist to you, maybe there's verbal abuse, maybe even physical abuse. What kind of symptoms would you exhibit that people should be aware of? Like, how do you how do you know, like, yeah, this might be unhealthy for me? Because some people might just go through it without being aware at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you're always ruminating over hard things that you're encountering all the time, that's one signal. If you can't sleep at night, so the insomnia because you're replaying these awful experiences in your minds. Um, if you have an upset stomach because
Mm.
you're like, clenched and just feeling nauseous and maybe pain from holding in all that tension, headaches. And then, of course, if you go to your doctor and they say, well, your blood pressure is really high all of a sudden, or your blood sugar looks weird, or you're losing weight or gaining weight, all of these are signals that something is going on, and it's something that's meaningful. So those are my that's my short list.
That's how a job can kill you, in a sense.
Yeah.
Oof.
And it's
Yeah,
tough
gotta.
because I recognize that it's somebody's livelihood. So it's even worse than being, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say it's worse than, but it's probably on par with being in an abusive, intimate relationship, right? Because
Yeah,
both are hard to get out of.
Yeah, I would agree. It's hard to get out of a job
that's true.
when it's you need the money. You need money to get out
That's
of a
it.
job. But if you don't have the money to leave a job, if you don't have savings, what are you going to do? You're stuck. And then you're stuck in the cycle and it's hard to escape and you can't work outside of the job because you're just too stressed and sick because of the job. Yeah, I'm lucky that my work culture and environment is very supportive and I feel healthy and happy with my coworkers and my job. I've definitely been in places before where I've had bosses that have had ego trips or different, inappropriate things happening in the workplace and I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Ali, that you've able to find this place for you that supports you in the way that you need and doesn't get you. Basically, you're not being treated in a way that you don't want to be.
Mhm.
There's no racism there. There's no abuse. That's what people should be seeking. Like if you're in if you're in a workplace where you're just being mistreated or underappreciated, find the right place for you. You know, reach out, try to talk to people, um, lean on your support system. These are things that you gotta
What do you
use
what do you
and
tell
just
people
go through.
in who are in a job that they hate or in a career field that they've come to not like and they're older maybe and they've already started their career? I know, how do you get them to pivot and take the leap of faith into the unknown, right?
Well, it's a tough thing. I mean, I think ideally, if you're going to leave one job, you want to find the next job, have it lined up, so
Mm-hmm.
that you're not left with nothing in between. And I also believe in self-employment, at least as a side hustle for some people.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So, for instance, if you're relatively junior in your career and you have some skills that you could be developing outside of your day job, assuming there's no conflict of interest, I think it makes sense to just nurture those abilities so that they keep developing. And that way, if ever something terrible happens, well, you could at some point fan the flames enough to make that into something that you could transition into.
Wow.
But but even as a part-time side hustle, I just like it because if you're successful in your side hustle, even if you're kind of underemployed in your day job, well, it's a good signal and a good reminder of what you are capable of. And ideally, if it's bringing in some money, then it offsets underemployment.
I
And
love
let's
that.
face it, in North America, things are kind of expensive right now,
Yep.
so it's a good hedge against inflation.
What do you think, Said?
Um, I think I should ask the next question, which is: Are black people losing their faith?
I hope not.
So-
You mean losing their faith in terms of spirituality, or losing their faith in things ever getting better?
Let's start with spirituality. Yes.
I hope not, and I don't think they are.
Okay.
I myself have been, I have not been as regular going to church as I used to be. Just the
Okay.
demands of life. Half the time I go and I'm so tired, I feel like I'm going to fall asleep, and that's not a good look. But that's different from not having any faith.
Yeah.
And right, and so as a rule, I still find a lot of people still have religious faith.
Yeah.
There's probably some disillusionment and some discouragement in terms of faith that things are going to get better because it's
Hmm.
you know it's been a long journey.
Hmm.
And even after what we've been through, especially in North America after the pandemic and George Floyd, and these are not like one-time things. These are still kind of ongoing. I mean, I've known people getting COVID recently, and I know people still face hardships in the workplace,
Yeah.
right? So even though there have been some improvements, sometimes certain things can't be fixed fast enough. So while you're still grappling with it, it feels like forever.
Hmm.
But I hope people are not losing faith on both sides because, on balance, things are better now than they were 5 years ago, 20 years
Hmm.
ago, 200 years ago.
That's true. That's important to know, to remember that things are getting better, but I guess we just always have such high standards once we get adjusted to a certain lifestyle that we forget that it is getting better.
Yeah, totally. I don't think losing faith is going to help you in getting better too. I think you need faith. You need to give yourself the chance for things to get better, because without that, you're already setting yourself up to fail. You're setting yourself up to not have a better future. And so
Yeah.
faith is what you need. You need hope, you need faith, you need a dream of things getting better for yourself, for your loved ones, for your community, because
Yeah.
that's the only way they can, crush us in many different ways, financially and our health and such. But as long as the one thing they can't take away from us is our belief in ourselves, our faith, and our hope for the future. And that is what's going to let
Yeah.
us build build the future, is my
That's
You
opinion.
it.
tell them, Ali. That's true. You got it.
There you go.
And
Absolutely.
What a
speaking
beautiful
of
episode.
as before, it hasn't concluded yet. Wait, we still have a few more minutes, Ali. And there's this question that I did want to ask. Speaking of faith, um, Arab people and Black people both like have strong faiths and belief systems.
Mhm.
So, but my question is, what do Arabs and Black people have in common, other than obviously faith and belief system, even from what you've seen and from your perspective?
I'm not a great historian, but I can
Yeah.
definitely see parallels in terms of shared oppression. It
Mm,
looks
okay.
different. It looks different, but we've both experienced oppression where other
Yeah.
people try to, impose their values on us or mistreat us or
Hmm.
take from us, exploit us. Yeah.
No, those are very good points. This, I feel like this is
It's
something
hard
that
to
Arabs
watch.
should.
Yeah. It's hard to watch. It's hard to experience, but, I know that we have that in common.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, you're right. And I feel like Arabs should take this into consideration because even Arabs can be also racist. So it's just like, guys, like you might want to take a different angle about your approach here.
What do you mean,
Yeah,
Said?
there's that.
Yeah.
So okay, maybe that wasn't a very clear statement. What I'm trying to say is like instead of you know causing this rift between races, and you guys can work together. So like all the minorities can just they have to kind of work together and like help each other and support each other due to due to the fact that they're all facing the same type of oppression. But like you said, doctor, it might be a different type, but it's still oppression in the same way and it has the same effect on them. So maybe working together, using the same like using each other's networks to support each other and services, they can
Yeah,
find a way
because
to like grow and improve together.
I know that anti-black racism it's universal in many respects. So there's that. But then I also recognize that in the past there have been national leaders who've seen similarities between what's happened in South Africa and what was happening in the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that kind of shared appreciation for oppression and some unity and cooperation. I think at least it makes the world feel less lonely.
That is very true.
We're in it together.
Dr. Helen, thank you. Exactly. Thank you so much for coming on to the pod.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Any last words of advice for our viewers?
I think viewers should keep listening and tuning into your podcast. You guys
Yeah.
are great.
Much
you.
appreciated. Saeed, what did we learn today?
And we learned quite a lot about Black psychology. What are the major issues that they face? What are the hurdles and obstacles they face in business, employment, health, and also as Arabs ourselves, I learned, and Ali, you learned, that we face the same issues as them. So maybe should be like a message to everyone. Looks like as minorities, we should just all be friends and like work together. Hopefully, I'm just not rambling and I'm actually being coherent with what I'm saying.
Love it, Saeed. You're making a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And we're
Thank you
part
for
of the
your
global
support.
majority, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
That is
Yes.
true.
Together we are more. Anyway, Dr. Helen, how can people find you and how can they connect with you?
Probably the easiest place is through my book website, theresilientcareer.com.
Yeah.
There's links to all my socials there. There's a contact link, all my socials.
Perfect. And we'll also be including them in the video's description.
Okay, thank you.
Doctor, thank you so much for being on the pod again. And we salute to cover the camera to end this.
Yes, what a lovely
Oh,
episode.
you can join us.
Subscribe, everyone. Thank you.
All
Come
right,
again.
thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Woo.